Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have us once again, Dr. Buck Melton.
Greetings.
A veritable fountain of wisdom and knowledge. And
a fountain of something.
It's always great to have you here, Buck.
Thank you.
Well, we certainly had all kinds of discussions about all kinds of things. And right now, maybe we could just talk about two of the major conflicts that are going on in the world, and just touch lightly on them about what causes war a little bit. And maybe we could start about discussing the Ukraine and Russia. We've had different opinions about the complexities of nationalism in Eastern Europe, the Russian view, the Ukrainian view. And it seems, in looking at what happened here, the Ukrainians were just living their lives. Is that true? And they weren't causing any particular trouble for the Russians. Is that true? And then the Russians decided to just crush them. Now, presumably a war had been going on for a long time in the eastern Ukraine without too much, just a low-grade war, if you want to say that. And the Russians had seized a substantial bit of land, and they'd also taken the Ukraine, but the Crimea, and the two were separate. And then, bingo, the Russians just moved in, and you could say they were pretty much the aggressors. There's not much doubt about that. Were the Ukrainians the aggressors? Did they do anything to provoke or start the war? They existed, I guess you could say that.
Yes. Well, not to my knowledge. I think in this case, and of course you've got the wrong Dr. Melton on to discuss this. Right. The other Dr. Melton is much better in matters of Russian history. I do know that Russia, going back more than 1,000 years, is what I refer to as a continental power, a country with a lot of internal resources, but borders that are not at all defensible. And if you look at the border between Russia and points to the west, Central and Western Europe, there are no good borders to mention. And Russia has been invaded something like 8 times in the last 200 years. This tends to make a people very distrustful, very xenophobic, very concerned about doing what's necessary to protect those borders. And the door swings both ways. Just as you can be invaded, so too you can invade. And so once World War II came to an end, and even before it came to an end, the Soviet Union seemed to be adopting the idea that the best way to prevent future invasions from Napoleon's or Hitler's or whoever's, capitalists, you name it, would be to build buffer states, and so you get the Iron Curtain. Fast forward to the 1990s, when the Berlin Wall comes down, the Iron Curtain disappears, and we had a golden opportunity there. And for a while it looked like we were going to do it, to de-escalate things with the former Soviet Union. But then we pushed too far. We did not disband NATO, which in retrospect may have been a bad idea. And countries began joining NATO. Poland is one great example. And so countries that had been part of the Eastern Bloc, that had been part of the Warsaw Pact and that buffer zone, now belong to what the old line Russians see as the enemy. And I think that got to Putin. Putin, KGB officer, raised on the old system, and he sees this as some sort of existential threat to Russia. And I think one reason that he goes after Ukraine is that it looked very much like Ukraine was going to join NATO. So let's strike first and try to regain the traditional territory belonging to the Russian Empire.
Sort of where I'm trying to sail the ship is, in retrospect, is there anything that could have been done to stop this? And I think the Russians had asked, well, it would really cool us out a lot if NATO said, no, we're not going to let Ukraine join NATO.
Yes,
that would have really been cool. and it would have presumably done something. The other thing is this low-grade war in the east of Ukraine. Would there be any conference, any settlement that could have taken place? And what I guess I'm saying is, in retrospect, is there something that could have been done before this actually happened to cool things down? And there should be in place the United Nations. There are different kinds of organizations. And it looks like all of those institutions failed in this case. And you could say which side is fair, which side is whatever when these conflicts take place. But it's to prevent these interchanges, some kind of judicial oversight, I think, would be a useful thing. And certainly trying to understand what happened altogether. And it's undeniable that Putin is, in my opinion, the aggressor here. He did this, he did that. However, they may say, well, we had to do it because of the
fascist threat that was on our border.
And they sort of created it. These demons, I've said maybe how much I've talked about this, but I think people require demons. They produce demons. They make demons. They want demons. If they're sitting happily in a sunny room reading a newspaper or drinking a cup of coffee, they still want demons. They require demons. So, well, all right. So the Nazis have come back. I mean, even though the head of the Ukraine was a Jewish guy, okay, fine. They're back. They're going to come, do all these terrible things to us, and on and on. And we have to deal with that. And maybe it is impossible. Maybe it is impossible to stop this. But certainly, some kind of assessment of anything that could have been done to have stopped this.
Well, you bring up a couple of interesting points, and this is why I go back to Putin, because if you've got a dictatorship, which Russia essentially is at this point, you said that, and you were sort of following my lead here, that if we had categorically said, no, we're not going to let in Ukraine, you don't have to worry about that. On the one hand, they could have said, oh, good, that's fine, then we don't have to invade. On the other hand, Putin could have said, oh, good, that gives me a free hand and I can expand my sphere of influence. And you don't really know which way he's going to jump. Maybe he did not even know which way he's going to jump. But regarding the demons, you can really focus in on one individual here and which way is he going to jump. If you've got a more liberal, democratic, responsible system, then it's maybe easier to see where public opinion is headed if you do this or do that. But the question about can the UN jump in, the idea of collective security, and this sort of goes back to one of our previously taped episodes, the idea of the court of world opinion, if you will. The whole idea of the League of Nations, of the Hague conferences of the United Nations, are that there is some sort of international standard of behavior that most of the peoples of the world can get behind and sign on to. And if you get some small armed minority or some individual state that transgresses those norms, then the world community will step in and slap it down and say no. But 60 or 70 plus years of United Nations, and add another 10 or 20 years of League of Nations on top of that, shows that that's not the way that system works. That there are so many different political situations, so many different ideologies, that these ideologies try to game the system, try to use these international bodies to get what they want, or failing that, they ignore the pressure from these international bodies. I mean, the number of times that one of the members of the Security Council vetoes what would be unanimity on the other side. I can only think of 2 or 3 situations when you actually saw the Security Council act in a way that had been envisioned.
Well, we've sort of went around the block a little bit on this, and I'm not sure what conclusions we came up with, although it's bad this happened. Maybe we should look in more detail as what's transpired. Now let us go into an area that brave men and women presumably are a little hesitant to discuss, and that is the situation in the Middle East. It looks like the ferocity of different opinions it stops well-wishers from even discussing what's going on there. I mean, whatever statements you try and make, one side or the other will think you're against them, and will try and, in some ways, silence you, do whatever, and that's a bad state of affairs. Particularly, I think I would call us well-wishers. I think I'm not too difficult to obtain that title. Maybe it's a slight bit of arrogance. But having said that, what could have been done to have prevented this? I mean, I'll just ask that. What could have been done? And so Hamas did all these horrible, horrible things, presumably. If there had been better information, then some kind of preemptive steps could have been taken. So that would be one thing that would have done something. So is there, and the Israelis are going to look into this, apparently after everything happens, but how hard is it to do something like that, and are we assisting different nation states in these issues, and should we? I mean, do we have enough of extraordinary abilities to monitor everything that's said, little eavesdropper, little drones flying around listening to what you say? I mean, whatever. I mean, is that possible? Would that have been useful? And would it in some ways have been presumptive for us to get involved directly in that, or do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I think you're asking the wrong question there.
This will be one of many. I'll start with that one.
Yes, I think what you're asking is, if we had picked up on something, could we have taken a preemptive action
Or
and
the
limited, somebody?
Right, the Israelis.
Could-
limited
yes.
event at that point, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And yes, there would have been bloodshed, there would have been violence, but there would have been less of it.
Yes.
The bigger question is, can the United States wave a magic wand and do away completely with the ethnic tensions, the religious tensions, the territorial ambitions of these two sides that go back not just before the United States was even dreamed of, but before Western civilization had even known that there was a North and South American continent. And to go back to you, that there is something deep in the reptile brain that leads to this, and I can't think of anything.
So what I wanted
yes.
to do was to start to the most superficial tactical thing that could have done that to stop this. And then you get into the history of the area, all of the awful things that have happened.
Yes.
And you can certainly see each side as to why they did this. And I would start by talking about mental illness or madness. So if the events that took place when these Hamas people flooded in are just indescribably horrible. And how could a normal person do something like that? I mean, that's a question. And we had some discussion about war crimes earlier. And presumably this would be a pretty obvious war crime. All the people that did this, I mean, we discussed dropping bombs out of airplanes or shooting missiles, but cutting someone's throat really resonates, and the wickedness of it and the hatred behind it is extraordinary. And the other question to ask is, if somebody does something like that, are they mentally ill? Is there something wrong with them? And indeed, any kind of human that does some kind of heinous act, would a rational human do that, or is that part of normal human behavior? Are war crimes brutal events? Is that normal? And is there an excuse for doing something like that
Well, here we need a psychiatrist, we need a
Yes,
sociologist.
yes, we do.
Because,
yes, we do.
Because once again, assuming a religious element here, and a lot of it is simply ethnic. I mean, it's simply different Bedouin groups who are fighting over territory, but beyond that is the religious element, and so we have to ask a very basic moral question. What about a religion whose God either permits or outright demands violent actions against members of another group? Does that equate with mental illness? I mean, that's is anybody equipped to be able to answer that? Obviously, since God can't be proved.
I'll make the
proof.
comment
Yes.
between the Koran and the Old Testament. There are some similarities there about the Jehovah and how people respond. To, I guess you call them evil. How do you respond to evil? And it's pretty violently, I would say. Each book at least mentions violent behavior. Well, that's the point. So just asking this question, if somebody comes in and cuts a baby's head off, does the religion say that's good? I mean, it would be, I'm not sure it would. I mean, that's what I think. I mean, if you really looked into the ethical interface of each religion, I don't think people would routinely say that, and
Yes.
religious leaders would not routinely say that. And it does look, if one can believe what transpired here, there's some kind of psychological issue that needs to be probed as the start of how these controversies are taking place and sociological, and the issues are so deep-seated, and also there's a question of power. So it looks like the resolution of these long-standing tensions, neither side, I think, sees a rational way out of this, or they've attempted to, but the end game is just power. I'm going to hurt you so much I'll win on either side. I'm just going to basically destroy you. So the Palestinians can say, I don't know, one land from the river to the sea. Well, that means destroying Israel, and the Israelis certainly are attempting to punish Hamas to such a degree that no opponent will ever appear again in the same with the same intensity.
And of course, that's never worked. I mean, many regimes and governments have tried that. Let's be as brutal to them as possible, and then they'll never come back to do this again. I cannot immediately think of any situation in which that's actually worked. As a matter of fact, that tends to spawn even more radicals. If you look at the Muslim world, it just these young radicalized men. It's Hydra. You cut off one head and two more appear. And admittedly, Israel has done some rough stuff during the peace towards civilians, and their response is, but you're out to get us. And while that sounds paranoid, I think that Israel's got a great comeback there. It's not paranoia if they're really out to get you. And based on how the rest of the world has, what it has done to the Jewish world for all of recorded history, there is something to that.
Absolutely.
And of course, living in the shadow of the, of what should be called the Shoah, that the Gentile world refers to it as the Holocaust. That's a terrible misappropriation of a sacred Jewish word, a sacrifice that is all burnt up to God. The Jews simply refer to it as the Shoah, the calamity, the catastrophe.
Yes.
Which
happened
yes.
with a traditionally pious, civilized Christian civilization.
Yes.
It did these terrible things.
Yes.
And I think it could be pointed out, I mean, there's a complicated story here between these religious groups, and I could say we live in a secular age, pretty much, and it's just understanding the intensity that religion puts on the situation. Maybe that's an important thing for well-wishers to try and get through. Certainly the Jewish story is just one of several thousand years of distress and constant injury and discrimination and all kinds of. I'm the little guy, and the big guys have just been stepping on me, killing me, abusing me. I can barely live for a couple thousand years. And interestingly enough, I think the Islamic world, in many ways, was more accepting of the Jewish people. I mean, I don't think I'm overstating that, but
no, mainstream.
Yeah, compared with traditionally, compared with Spain. So everyone left, and many of them went to Istanbul, and they were well received there, and et cetera, et cetera. But just this decades of being powerless, and the disaster of World War II, and then in many ways with the connivance of the Western powers and the Islamic people would say the colonial powers, they basically said with difficulty, we're going to just wash our hands of this whole situation and good luck to you. But Western influence helped win the war, and then it happened several times after that. And so, in a way, the Islamic world sees the West and Israel as an alliance against them. And that's quite a schism in the world, in the post-colonial world. We've gotten into these complexities of who should be involved in the fight. It's reminiscent of the start of World War I. In a way, they had this great system of alliances, and the two nations were in dispute, and they just brought in all of their allies to into the struggle. And so that's certainly something that could happen.
Well, yes, and there's been a lot of saber rattling going on in the Middle East from Iran and from even from Turkey, apparently warning Israel not to escalate this thing. So, we're probably, especially considering the diffusion of power in the world today, and of nuclear weapons and of nerve agents. I would say that we are probably closer to a major nuclear exchange or a dust-up between great powers today, closer today than we have been since the Berlin Wall came down.
A card in the deck is nuclear weapons.
Yes.
Israel's, although I don't think they admit this, but they've got a great number of nuclear weapons.
Yes.
And the Iranians allegedly are trying to get one, but what do I know? But it certainly seems likely that the North Koreans could have slipped something in there. Mm-hmm. I would be astounded if there's not some kind of nuclear weapon around, and that's trying to keep this terrible situation from spreading. That's obviously on the mind of everyone. How well is the U.S. doing with that? I mean, how well are we accompanying it? At least initially. President Biden gave full support to Israel, and I think maybe for domestic reasons, he's walking that back some. Plus, the sense of destruction is on television, and so people are getting a real taste of pain and suffering, and it's causing more neutrality. How's the U.S. doing in this? And I sort of said this, is it possible that the Israeli plan, which I think we could say is quite understandable, very understandable, as to, well, we've been kicked around, this is the same old thing that's happened before, we're no longer the supplicant people to step on anymore. You can't step on us again, or we know the use of power. We tried reason, we tried this, we tried that, and power is what the bad guys understand.
And they are.
Force.
And Netanyahu is speaking in apocalyptic terms these last 2 or 3 days, saying this is going to be it. We're going to wipe them from the face of the earth and make sure they never do this again.
And there are a couple of million people there,
yes.
And it's the whole possibility. What I'm trying to say is, I think this strategy is as understandable as it is, and it's very understandable, is not going to work. That's what I think. And it's not going to work because everything, it's a war of information and the predispositions of people that receive the information. So in the post-colonial world, which are, I don't know, there are 8 billion people on the planet, let's say, 6 billion or so or feel like they're post-colonial and they're against the West. So if the facts are put there, well, I'm not going to pay any attention to the other side's facts. These are the facts I want to look at. And so certainly I don't think that just the possibility of expunging the bad guys and then possibly killing some huge score of alleged innocents, they might not really be innocent, but many, many people are being injured in this war of the PR war. It doesn't look like the strategy is going to work. And can the U.S., that's my opinion, circumstances will prove me wrong, but is the U.S. is apparently trying to get into an honest broker role. I don't think it's possible, though, is it? The U.S. cannot be an honest broker. There's no way for the U.S. to easily resolve this dispute. They're on the Israeli side.
If neither side is willing to compromise, then there's nothing to broker. You asked earlier if the U.S. could have used its technology. This was sort of a Pearl Harbor out of the blue thing, but it reminded me of the USS Liberty incident of the Six-Day War in 1967, when the Israelis attacked a U.S. intelligence ship, part of the U.S. Navy, and the official story, both sides, very, hastened to say this was a case of misidentification. The Israelis thought that this was an Egyptian merchant ship, but there have always been people who maintained that the Israelis knew exactly what they are attacking, and they didn't like the fact that a U.S. intelligence ship, we weren't their ally, but we were certainly, I think, more or less pro-Israeli. And yet they were not going to let a U.S. intel ship eavesdrop on Israeli communications, and so that's why they took it out. So,
you can also go, the complexities go back and forth about each side attempting to extract whatever the story is, their advantages one way or another. The war of intelligence services, who's getting this, who's getting that. There's sort of a subtle war that's worldwide between different security systems, or each nation is attempting to do whatever. But that aside, right now, it's really quite spooky, isn't it? It's quite spooky. What is the end game here? What is the end game? And is there if it would appear to me that if the Israelis they sterilize, let's say, the northern part of the Gaza Strip, it's still, I'm not sure that strategy would be successful, and there needs to be some off-ramp out there that I hope diplomats are doing something about. And the other issue is the U.S. role in this, and obviously the Israelis depend on the support of the U.S. and in our country. Our very diverse population is getting entangled in this dispute and to no one's best interest. And so can the U.S. continue to do this? We have all our own crises. What's going on? What's the long-term outlook? How are we going to do this? It's quite a vexing problem for policymakers, and it just brings up the idea, are our political leaders, do they have the intellectual capabilities of being able to navigate these troubled waters? And I don't like to talk about the president, but presumably his advisors are able to fly the airplane here. I mean, that's a difficult situation, but that's seemingly where we are.
Well, I'm not sure any president would be in a good situation here.
Well, that's a point. That's a point.
Yeah, that once again you are dealing with hatreds and differences that go back long before America was even a mote in God's eye, and I don't know where we go. For me, just the symbolic, the thing that symbolizes the whole problem is the fact that the Dome of the Rock is built on the Temple Mount, and until you can divorce those two somehow, this isn't going away.
Well, you're a great science fiction fan, I know, and what is it, Canticle for Leibowitz, did I get that right? Yes, saying that there's out of them, and which many people will say, fundamentalist people particularly, well, the world's going to go through this event in the, quote, Holy Land, and I'm not sure how far we're off the mark on that. Yes. It's a very spooky situation there right now.
Yes, well, the one that I think of, perhaps the answer is from an early Star Trek episode, Errand of Mercy, which was a Cold War metaphor. It introduced the Klingons, and
my favorite people.
And yes, and the Federation of the Klingons.
Little guys there, right? Yeah.
Yes, they both have battle fleets in space over this insignificant little planet. And then the owners of this planet reveal themselves as a super advanced race, and they neutralize both battle fleets. And Captain Kirk gets his nose out of joint, and the Klingon commander too, and they say essentially, why are you interfering? Why are you doing this? We have the right to destroy, and these are not Kirk's words, but we have the right to destroy each other. We have, we're going to fight. And the superior beings say, yes, and we're putting a stop to it. We don't care what your issues are, but we are going to prevent the fight. So maybe that's what it takes.
On this note, I've discussed brain chemistry, but certainly war can be, for participants, an intoxicating, wicked drug. And on that note,
Robert E. Lee's quotation, it is a good thing that war is so terrible, otherwise we would grow too fond of it.
That's a good point. Well, okay, Buck, thanks for your interchange once again. Thank you. Thanks.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves. Endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.